In the vast and often unsettling annals of unexplained phenomena, few accounts have embedded themselves so deeply into the public consciousness as the case of Betty and Barney Hill. The event, which unfolded on a lonely stretch of road in New Hampshire in September of 1961, stands as a seminal moment in the lore of extraterrestrial encounters. The Hills, an ordinary couple, returning from a brief vacation, found their lives irrevocably altered by an encounter with a strange, silent craft that descended from the night sky. What followed was a period of missing time and a cascade of disturbing, fragmented memories that would only be unlocked under the careful guidance of hypnosis. The story that emerged was one of abduction, of being taken aboard an alien vessel and subjected to physical examinations by non-human entities. Yet, the extraordinary nature of their claim was amplified by the immense social pressures they already faced. In the deeply divided America of the early 1960s, their interracial a white social worker, and Barney, an African-American postal worker, was a constant source of scrutiny and prejudice. To then come forward with a story of such profound strangeness was to invite a level of ridicule and disbelief that few could withstand. Their narrative became a cornerstone, a foundational text for the abduction phenomenon that would follow for decades. The Hills' experience contrasts sharply with the narratives of other figures who would later claim contact. Individuals like the Swiss farmer Billy Meier presented a very different kind of story. Meier asserted not just a single encounter, but a long-standing, ongoing relationship with beings from the Pleiades star cluster. He produced a prolific and highly controversial collection of photographs and videos depicting what he called but his claims extended far beyond simple contact. He declared himself to be the reincarnation of numerous prophets, including Muhammad and Jesus Christ, an assertion that led many even within the ufological community to dismiss him as a charlatan or a deluded megalomaniac. His case became a lightning rod for debate, a symbol of the schism between those seeking credible evidence and those embracing a more spiritual interpretation of the UFO phenomenon. Similarly, George Adamski, an earlier figure from the 1950s, cultivated the persona of a cosmic ambassador. He held lectures and wrote books describing his supposed meetings with benevolent, human-like Venusians in the California desert. Adamski's narrative was less about terrifying abduction and more about spiritual enlightenment, positioning him as a chosen messenger for these wise space brothers. These divergent accounts illustrate the broad and often contradictory spectrum of claimed human-alien interaction. This field of study eventually gave rise to a specific terminology, classifying contacteeism as a close encounter of the fifth kind. This classification denotes a profound step beyond mere observation or even forced abduction. It describes a deliberate, bilateral, and often ongoing communication between humans and non-human intelligence, a purported relationship built on some form of mutual recognition or purpose. Yet, within this already extraordinary framework, there exist claims that push the boundaries even further. These are stories that transcend communication and venture into the realm of the miraculous, accounts of individuals who claim not only to have met visitors from the cosmos, but to have received astonishing, inexplicable physical healings at their hands. One such incredible account begins not in the deserts of America, but on the quiet country roads of rural France. The date is August 11th, 1969, a time when humanity's gaze was fixed on the heavens, still basking in the afterglow of the Apollo 11 moon landing just 3 weeks prior. On a long, winding highway connecting the southern city of Perpignan with Rouen in the north, a private ambulance makes its solemn journey. This is not an emergency vehicle rushing to a scene, but a transport. Its purpose grim and methodical. Inside, the atmosphere is heavy with quiet tension. A driver navigates the dark roads, accompanied by a paramedic. In the back, a woman sits beside her gravely ill husband, the patient at the center of this somber procession. They have been traveling for some time, the rhythmic hum of the engine a monotonous soundtrack to their vigil. Suddenly, a subtle shift in the patient's stillness prompts the paramedic to act. He performs his checks, his movements practiced and efficient, but his expression grows grave. He feels for a pulse, listens for a breath, and finds only silence. The vehicle pulls over to the side of the desolate road, the engine finally falling quiet. In the stark, clinical light of the ambulance's interior, the paramedic confirms the inevitable. The patient has passed away. The journey has ended, not at a hospital, but here, on a darkened roadside, leaving a grieving widow and two professionals with a tragic and unexpected new reality. The mission had begun as a somber but routine transfer. The patient, a man in the final, irreversible stages of a terminal illness, was being transported from a facility in Perpignan, near the Spanish border, back to his home in Rouen. It was a journey of nearly 1,000 kilometers, a long, quiet drive north through the heart of France. This was not a race to save a life, but a solemn escort to the end of one. The man's condition was described as exceptionally grave. He was being moved so that he could pass away, surrounded by the familiarity of his own home. But fate, it seemed, had its own schedule. Somewhere along the dark ribbon of the autoroute, the patient's fragile hold on life slipped away. The end came quietly, preempting their arrival. In the sterile confines of the ambulance's rear compartment, a profound silence fell. A silence that signaled the transition from medical emergency to grim logistical task. Acknowledging the inevitable, the two paramedics decided against any formal announcement or stop. Protocol was clear, but the human element dictated a quiet continuation of their journey. They would proceed in silence. During the initial hours of the trip, while their passenger was still alive, the driver had maintained a cautious, steady pace, acutely aware that every bump and jostle could cause further distress. Now, with that concern rendered moot by death, the dynamic inside the vehicle shifted. The driver, Jean-Michel, a man of 29, allowed his foot to press a little more firmly on the accelerator. The urgency of care was gone, replaced by the hollow duty of delivering mortal remains. The ambulance, a new model with a powerful engine, responded smoothly, eating up the kilometers with a newfound efficiency. Jean-Michel was a capable driver, calm and focused. A former motorcycle racer, he was no stranger to high speeds or the intense concentration required to navigate long distances. He was a married man, a French citizen of Algerian descent, a professional who had seen his share of tragedy and remained grounded. The flashing emergency lights and the piercing siren had been extinguished long ago. Now, they were just another anonymous vehicle moving through the night, their grave purpose hidden from the other scattered headlights on the road. The atmosphere in the cab was thick with unspoken thoughts as Jean-Michel drove on, the rhythmic hum of the engine a hypnotic counterpoint to the quiet grief of their task. It was in this state of detached focus that something profoundly strange occurred. It wasn't a sound from the radio, nor a voice from his partner. It was an intrusion into his own mind, a thought so clear, so alien, that it felt like a direct transmission. A message bloomed in his consciousness, fully formed and unnervingly serene. It was a voice that was not a voice, a feeling that spoke in perfect, articulate sentences. "Let yourself go," the message began, its tone placid and reassuring. "Nothing bad will happen to you. We are here to protect you. For you, everything will be imaginary. You will feel nothing. Remain calm." The words echoed in the silent fear of his mind. Jean-Michel's hands tightened on the steering wheel. As a paramedic, he was trained to be rational, to diagnose symptoms, to follow logical procedures. Hallucinations, auditory pareidolia, triggered by the engine's drone and emotional stress. He was a pragmatist, not a mystic. He tried to dismiss it, to file it away as a momentary aberration brought on by fatigue and the morbid nature of their journey. He had to keep driving. He straightened his posture, took a deep breath, and focused his eyes back on the hypnotic white lines of the highway, stretching into the darkness. But the unsettling feeling lingered, a psychic residue he couldn't shake. Just as he was attempting to reassert his sense of normalcy, his partner, who had been staring blankly out the passenger window, suddenly spoke, his voice cutting through the quiet tension. "Look, over there?" Jean-Michel's gaze followed his partner's pointed finger, lifting from the road to the vast, stardusted sky above. There, descending with an impossible, deliberate slowness, was an object that defied easy explanation. At first, it resembled a small, perfectly round cloud, detached from any other formation in the clear night sky. It was not the brilliant white of a sunlit cumulus, but a flat, matte, grayish orb, seeming to absorb the ambient moonlight rather than reflect it. Its descent was not a fall. It was a controlled, graceful maneuver, a silent and purposeful lowering from the heavens. As they watched, mesmerized, the phenomenon grew even stranger. From the underside of the gray sphere, a new element began to emerge. It resolved into what looked like a solid base, a structure that was unmistakably artificial. It had the cold, hard gleam of polished metal, a technological form that starkly contrasted with the ethereal, cloud-like object it supported. The sight was utterly bizarre, a fusion of the organic and the manufactured hanging impossibly in the sky. The sheer strangeness of it was paralyzing, yet the road demanded attention. The duty to continue their journey warred with the overwhelming need to stop and comprehend what they were witnessing. The feeling that had accompanied the mental message returned with overwhelming force, a palpable sense that they were caught in an event far outside the bounds of normal human experience, something that was not supposed to be happening yet undeniably was. The night air is cool and still as the patrol car glides along the darkened highway, a solitary vessel navigating a sea of asphalt. Inside, Officer Jean is at the wheel. The rhythmic hum of the engine and the intermittent crackle of the dispatch radio, the only sounds breaking the silence of the late shift. It is a routine patrol, a familiar pattern of observation and presence. But in the distance, a pair of headlights appears, approaching from the opposite direction. At first, they are just another anonymous traveler in the night. Then, something becomes terribly wrong. The approaching vehicle begins a slow, deliberate drift, its trajectory veering languidly but unmistakably across the yellow centerline, leaving its designated lane and entering a collision course. A profound sense of unease settles over Officer Jean. He instinctively reacts, his training taking over. His hand flashes to the console, activating the emergency systems. The night is instantly shattered by the piercing wail of the siren and the disorienting strobe of red and blue lights that paint the trees and the road ahead in frantic, pulsating colors. The display is a universal signal of warning, an urgent demand to yield. Yet, the oncoming automobile remains utterly unresponsive. It continues its inexorable advance, seemingly oblivious to the blaring alarm and the brilliant visual alert. Jean grips the steering wheel, his knuckles white. He attempts a desperate, evasive maneuver, wrenching the wheel to the side. But the physics of the situation are unforgiving. The other driver is moving at a reckless speed, closing the rapidly shrinking gap between them with terrifying velocity. There is no time. There is no escape. The head-on impact is not merely a crash. It is a small, localized explosion of kinetic energy. The combined velocities of the two vehicles are unleashed in a single, catastrophic moment. A deafening roar of tortured metal and shattering glass obliterates all other sound. From Jean's perspective, the world dissolves into a maelstrom of violence. He witnesses the windshield before him crystallize into a million tiny fragments, a spiderweb of destruction, expanding outward in an instant. He feels the irresistible, crushing force of inertia propelling him forward, his body straining against the seatbelt's restraint. He perceives the front of his own vehicle compacting, the engine block being driven back into the cabin as if the car were made of paper. In that chaotic blur, he catches a fleeting, distorted glimpse of his partner being thrown violently by the force of the collision. And then, silence, an absolute, profound cessation of all sound and motion. Time itself appears to have fractured. For everyone and everything else, the moment is frozen. But for Jean, consciousness persists in a strange, suspended reality. He observes the scene from within this bubble of stillness. The tiny cubes of tempered glass from the windshield hang motionlessly in the air around him, a deadly, glittering constellation. The entire mangled wreck of the car seems to be floating in a void. It is in this impossible, silent tableau that a figure materializes directly in front of him. It does not appear to be human. Its form is slender, its skin a strange, ashen gray that seems to absorb the ambient light. The head is the most arresting feature. It is unnaturally large, completely devoid of hair, and dominated by enormous almond-shaped eyes. They are twin pools of liquid black, obsidian mirrors reflecting nothing, yet seeming to see everything. In place of eyebrows, there are pronounced bony ridges that give its expression an unreadable, alien quality. The being moves closer, or perhaps the space between them simply collapses. A voice, clear and calm, resonates not in the air, but directly within Jean's mind. Be assured, it communicates. Your injuries are only superficial. The statement is a jarring contradiction to the physical devastation surrounding him. In fact, you are unharmed. You will feel no physical pain, and there will be no lasting consequences from this event. On the contrary, you will be much stronger than before. You have been regenerated by a technique unknown on your planet. As this message concludes, the entity produces a small, metallic object from an unseen place. It is a smooth, thin disc, roughly the size of a coin, that glimmers with a faint internal light. With a delicate, precise movement, the being reaches forward and places the cool disc against the nape of Jean's neck. It then withdraws, fixes its inscrutable black eyes upon him one last time, and imparts a final thought. We will meet again soon. And with that, the spell is broken. The frozen moment shatters, and reality comes rushing back in a tidal wave of screaming metal, agonizing pain, and then, mercifully, the deep black of unconsciousness. The next thing he registers is the sterile white ceiling of a hospital room. The contrast between the entity's promise and his physical state could not be more stark. The medical reports paint a gruesome picture of near-fatal trauma. His liver has been ruptured, causing massive internal bleeding. His spleen, gallbladder, and one lung are perforated. He has sustained multiple, severe fractures throughout his body, including devastating compound fractures in his legs where the dashboard had collapsed, crushing the bones. Tremendous blows to the head have resulted in a severe concussion. His hands are mangled. Every part of his body is a testament to the brutal forces of the crash. As he lies broken and unconscious, a team of physicians stands by his bedside. Their voices low and grave, they are evaluating the overwhelming extent of the damage, debating the odds, weighing whether an attempt to save him is even feasible, or if his injuries are simply too catastrophic to survive. In the chaotic aftermath of the collision, a chilling silence descended. The twisted steel of the vehicles formed a grotesque monument to a moment of sudden, inexplicable tragedy. Within this wreckage, a grim tally was taken. The man's companion had perished instantly. The patient's own wife. A life extinguished in the blink of an eye. The driver of the other car, it would later be determined, had already been claimed by death before the impact. A massive coronary event seizing his heart and turning his vehicle into an unguided projectile. Amidst the carnage, a single, improbable survivor remained. The sequence of events was so bizarre, so cruelly orchestrated by fate, that it defied simple explanation. The collision wasn't an act of negligence, but a freak convergence of mortality, where one man's fatal heart attack precipitated the deaths of two others, leaving a fourth hovering precariously on the precipice of existence. Questions hang heavy in the air. Thick as the smoke from the smoldering engines, could such a chain of events truly be real? Is it possible for one person to endure such a catastrophic incident and live to recount it? The survivor's journey was only just beginning. Rushed to the hospital, his condition was assessed as utterly hopeless. The medical staff saw a man with the unmistakable pallor of death, a collection of injuries so severe that the consensus was clear: he would not survive to see the next sunrise. And yet, against all medical logic, the sun rose, and he was still there. This defiance of fate marked the start of an arduous ordeal. A grueling marathon of 18 separate surgical procedures designed to piece together a body that had been comprehensively shattered. But within this narrative of incredible survival lies a profound and unsettling anomaly. Throughout the entire ordeal, from the moment of impact to the long months of recovery, he reported experiencing no physical pain whatsoever. The record, both his own detailed recollection and the official medical reports, indicates that his heart stopped beating on several occasions during the frantic efforts to save him. He clinically died multiple times, only to be brought back by a determined medical team. Yet, even in these moments of ultimate physical distress, the sensation of pain was completely absent. In the ambulance, paramedics, following standard procedure for such traumatic injuries, administered a powerful dose of morphine. Their goal was twofold: to mitigate the excruciating pain that should have been racking his body, and to prevent him from succumbing to life-threatening shock. The drug, however, had no discernible effect. He did not drift into unconsciousness. His senses did not dull. He remained lucid, an unnervingly calm observer of his own devastation, even as his body lay broken and his life hung by the thinnest of threads. The physical reality was undeniable. X-rays and examinations revealed a litany of catastrophic injuries, including multiple severe fractures and extensive internal damage. As the surgical teams began their painstaking work, another layer of mystery was added to his case. During his stay in the sterilicy, quiet confines of the hospital, he claimed he was not alone. He recounted being visited again by the same enigmatic figures he had encountered before, beings with large almond-shaped eyes and oversized craniums. They would appear silently in his room, their presence a stark contrast to the clinical environment. Their message, delivered telepathically, was consistent and clear: "We come in peace." They offered him aid, a transfer of knowledge, and a profound responsibility. He was informed that he had been specifically chosen, that his survival was not an accident, but a necessity. His purpose, they explained, was to become a conduit, to share their message of peace and understanding with a world that desperately needed it. These visitations, while profoundly strange, seemed to coincide with his astonishing physical recovery. The man not only recuperated, he did so without any of the expected long-term consequences, known in medical terms as sequelae. His body had sustained fractures to his legs and hip, injuries that typically result in a permanent limp, chronic pain, and limited mobility. Yet he healed perfectly, walking without the slightest hint of a limp. Medical charts showed his internal organs, including his liver and kidneys, functioning with flawless efficiency. His lungs, which had suffered significant trauma, showed no scarring, no diminished capacity. It was as if the accident had never happened, a ghost event that left no physical trace on his body. The story sounds like pure fiction, a flight of unbelievable fancy. But the accident of 1971 was a real event, grounded in verifiable fact. Tangible evidence exists. There are photographs, stark black and white images capturing the horrific extent of the wreckage. More importantly, an official case file was created by the highway patrol authorities of the time. While the specific file number may be lost to memory, its existence confirms the core facts. This man was in a catastrophic car crash. He was hospitalized with injuries deemed unsurvivable, and against all odds, he survived, emerging not as a diminished man, but as a perfectly restored one, carrying a message he claimed was not of this world. In the 2 years that followed the bewildering incident, a profound and inexplicable transformation began to unfold within Jean-Michel. His life, once defined by the predictable rhythms of rural France, was now punctuated by a series of occurrences that defied all logic. These were not grand, earth-shattering events, but small, persistent anomalies. Strange little things that started to warp the very fabric of his reality. The first and most tangible of these new faculties was a peculiar form of magnetism, an invisible tether that seemed to connect his will to the metallic objects around him. What began as a subtle intuition became an undeniable power. Imagine the scene: a set of keys resting on a distant table, just beyond his physical reach, with a deep, quiet focus. A simple extension of his hand. The keys would twitch, then slide, scraping softly against the wood as they journeyed across the space to meet his grasp. This was not a parlor trick. It was a daily reality. He could manipulate cutlery, tools, and coins with an unnerving, fluid ease. This connection extended beyond simple attraction. When he would draw his hand near an electric lamp, the filament within the bulb would react violently, sputtering and flashing in a frantic, unsynchronized rhythm, casting, dancing, distorted shadows across the room. It was a disquieting display, as if the inanimate object was recoiling from his very presence. But the changes were not merely physical. A far more intimate and unsettling ability began to surface, a form of telepathic perception. He started receiving flashes of thought, waves of emotion from those around him, an unsolicited torrent of information that convinced him he had been irrevocably altered for a purpose. He came to believe, a man with a mission. Amidst this bizarre evolution, the memory of his initial encounter was underscored by another miracle: his complete and total recovery. The event, whatever its nature, had left him physically unharmed. There was no lingering pain, no debilitating after effects, no scars to mark the experience. It was as if it had never happened, a slate wiped clean, leaving only these strange new gifts in its wake. We must now advance the timeline to 1971. Jean-Michel is no longer just a farmer who experienced something strange. He has embraced his perceived mission, stepping onto the public stage. He travels, giving lectures and talks, sharing the intricate details of his story with captivated audiences. In one such gathering, amidst a sea of believers and the curious, a voice of structured skepticism rose. The questioner is not a heckler, but a figure of considerable weight in the field. Guy Terade, a formal and respected investigator of the UFO phenomenon. Terade was a man tempered by years of methodical research, an individual who had meticulously documented countless cases and, just as importantly, had unmasked numerous charlatans. He was not easily swayed by compelling testimony alone. He demanded proof, something tangible and objective that could be witnessed by all, not a subjective internal experience like telepathy. The challenge was laid down with precision. Jean-Michel was scheduled to speak in the city of Nice at the end of January. Terade demanded that Miguel use his supposed connection to these entities to arrange a demonstration of flyover of their crafts in the skies above the city. It was a bold, almost impossible request, designed to separate fact from fiction. To the astonishment of many, Jean-Michel accepted the challenge. As the 31st of January approached, a palpable tension grew. Then, on the designated evening, just before Miguel was to take the stage, the skies over Nice reportedly came alive. Reports began to circulate of strange lights, objects moving with silent, intelligent purpose, executing maneuvers that defied the capabilities of any known aircraft. While no single, definitive official document has ever emerged to codify the event, numerous anecdotal accounts and informal reports from that night persist, creating a powerful legend. Jean-Michel had seemingly delivered on his promise. This was not an isolated incident. The Nice demonstration became a precedent. A bizarre and compelling pattern emerged wherever Miguel was invited to speak. Strange aerial phenomena often preceded his arrival. He became a traveling ufologist, his lectures becoming events tinged with the anticipation of a potential celestial display. Through it all, his personal testimony remained a pillar of consistency. He never once contradicted his account, never embellished the details for dramatic effect. The story he told in 1978 was the exact same story he told in 1971. This unwavering consistency, coupled with the recurring light shows, began to attract serious, high-level attention. The story's ripples eventually crossed the Atlantic. In 1978, a delegation from the United States traveled to his home in France. This was not a group of civilian enthusiasts. It was comprised of personnel from the U.S. Navy and, remarkably, individuals representing NASA. They came to interview him, to conduct tests, to understand the man and the forces he claimed to command. The full extent and specific nature of their inquiries remained classified, but their very presence signified a profound interest from the highest echelons of American scientific and military institutions. The credibility of Jean-Michel Lesage's extraordinary tale had reached such a fever pitch that, just a couple of years after his alleged encounter, an invitation arrived from across the Atlantic. He was summoned to New York City, a world away from the quiet French countryside where his story began. This was not a casual visit. It was a summons to the heart of a scientific and intelligence apparatus deeply intrigued by phenomena that defied conventional explanation. Upon his arrival, as soon as he stepped from the aircraft into the bustling terminal of the airport, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. He was immediately and discreetly surrounded by a group of men in plain clothes, their demeanor professional and unyielding. These were agents of the Central Intelligence Agency, and they would become his constant shadows, their presence a silent testament to the seriousness with which his claims were being treated. From that moment, Lesage was no longer a private citizen but a subject of intense scrutiny. He was escorted not to a hotel, but directly to the prestigious grounds of Stanford University in California, a hub of cutting-edge research and intellectual rigor. It was here that he would be handed over to a team of specialists led by the notable and controversial researcher, Dr. Andrei Puharich, a man renowned for his work in parapsychology and his investigations into figures like Irregular. The objective was clear: to dissect Jean-Michel Lesage's mind and his story, layer by layer, in a controlled, clinical environment. The battery of tests that awaited him was exhaustive and designed to penetrate any potential deception. He was subjected to the cold, methodical interrogation of the polygraph, its needles scratching out his physiological responses to a barrage of questions, searching for the telltale spikes of a lie. Yet, the machine registered no deceit. He then underwent a comprehensive psychiatric and psychological evaluation, a deep dive into his personal history, his mental stability, and the very structure of his personality. Experts looked for any hint of psychosis, delusion, or a propensity for fantasy. Still, they found nothing amiss. Perhaps most invasively, electrodes were attached to his scalp for an electroencephalogram, or IG, to monitor the electrical activity of his brain in real time. Scientists watched the rhythmic pulses on the screen, hunting for any neurological anomaly that could explain his experience. Again, the results were normal. The conclusion from this barrage of scientific inquiry was unsettling for the investigators. The instruments detected no failure, no error, no indication of fabrication. The man before them, Jean-Michel Lesage, appeared to genuinely believe every single word of the incredible story he was telling. As a final, decisive measure, he was placed under deep hypnosis. In this suggestible, subconscious state, he was guided back to the events in question. Far from recanting his tale, he once again recounted the entire narrative, not as a distant memory, but as a vivid, present reality, filled with the same details and emotional conviction. With the tests concluded and no scientific basis to label him a fraud, Lesage was returned to France to resume his life. But the experience had irrevocably changed him. The validation, however clinical, had emboldened him. It was during this period, sometime in the 1980s, that his path intersected with another prominent figure in the world of ufology, Rael, the founder of the Raelian movement. This group, which posited that life on Earth was scientifically created by an alien species, was a blend of UFO belief and organized religion. While Lesage publicly maintained that he was not a particularly religious person and that his interest was purely scientific, emphasizing his Catholic upbringing as incompatible with such beliefs, something about Rael's model resonated with him. The idea of forming a community, a movement built around a central belief system, had been planted. From this seed of inspiration, Lesage founded his own organization, giving it a grand and academically imposing name, an acronym for Centre Européen d'Initiation, la Recherche Ufologique Scientifique, or the European Center for Initiation in Scientific Ufological Research. Despite its name, the organization's trajectory quickly veered away from objective science and rigorous UFO investigation. Instead, it began to operate on the level of unwavering belief and dogmatic principles, with Lesage at its center. The group dynamic shifted from inquiry to indoctrination, and Cirrus slowly but surely transformed into what could only be described as a cult. This transformation did not go unnoticed. When GEPAN, France's official and highly respected government agency for investigating unidentified aerospace phenomena, became aware of Cirrus, its judgment was swift and severe. GEPAN, the French equivalent of America's civilian-run MUFON, but with the official backing of the National Space Agency, publicly denounced Lesage and his followers. GEPAN formally and immediately distanced itself, declaring the entire Cirrus operation illegitimate and a distortion of genuine research. But the condemnation from the scientific establishment did little to deter Lesage. He continued to hold lectures, his charisma drawing in new followers. He authored 3 books, documenting his experiences in philosophy. Within these texts, however, critical inconsistencies emerged. While the core story of his encounter remained, crucial details would shift and contradict one another from one book to the next. He also made several grand prophecies, predicting future events that ultimately failed to materialize, chipping away at his credibility. The situation escalated until his group was officially catalogued by authorities not merely as a fringe movement, but as a dangerous cult, posing a potential threat to its members and society. In the cultural landscape of France during those years, a significant social battle was being waged over belief systems. At the forefront of this conflict was an organization known as the French Association for the Defense of Families and Individuals. This group, part of a broader European anti-cult movement, acted as a watchdog, scrutinizing new religious movements and alternative spiritual groups. It was within their framework that Xeris, the organization led by Jean-Michel, was officially labeled a cult, a term carrying the severe implication of a dangerous sect. For the association, this was not a casual designation. It signified a group believed to ensnare individuals, systematically altering their most fundamental perceptions of reality. The methodology was alleged to involve sophisticated techniques of psychological manipulation, designed to dismantle a person's established way of thinking and replace it with a new group-ordained ideology, effectively isolating them from their past and their families. This classification cast a dark shadow over Jean-Michel and his followers, placing them in direct opposition to powerful societal forces. Compounding this precarious situation was a deeply personal and explosive complication. Jean-Michel's own father-in-law was a dedicated and active member of this very anti-cult association. An ideological chasm ran straight through the heart of the family, a ticking time bomb of conflicting worldviews. In the face of this mounting pressure and public condemnation, Jean-Michel made a fateful decision. He resolved to abandon France, to escape the judgment and persecution. His vision was to journey to the Americas, a continent he viewed as a new frontier of spiritual freedom. There, he planned to establish a sanctuary, a new kind of community, be it a center for enlightenment, a church for a new age, or a commune for the like-minded where his teachings could flourish. But his plans for this exodus were not kept secret for long. When his father-in-law discovered the plot, the news was filtered through the lens of his own fervent convictions. He saw not a spiritual migration, but the leader of a dangerous cult, attempting to abscond with his daughter and grandchild, pulling them deeper into a web of delusion. The ideological conflict violently erupted into a personal one. The confrontation was swift and brutal. Jean-Michel's journey did not end in the Americas. It ended abruptly, his life extinguished by a volley of bullets fired by his own father. The visionary was dead, and with him, the dream of his promised land. The story, however, refused to die with him, leaving behind a legacy of profound and unsettling questions. The most glaring inconsistencies lay within his own unfulfilled prophecies. The credibility of any charismatic leader often rests upon the power of their foresight, and Jean-Michel had made bold predictions. He had spoken of a major, transformative event, deeply apocalyptic in its nature, that was to have its verification in the year 1996. His followers waited, but 1996 came and went with unnerving normalcy. The cataclysm never arrived. This was not an isolated failure. Other, smaller prophecies he had articulated also failed to materialize, creating cracks in the foundation of his teachings. His specific assertions about otherworldly visitors, their origins, and their intentions for humanity similarly dissolved without any tangible proof. With his tragic death, the grand narrative seemed to collapse. Yet, amidst the ruins of his unproven claims, one peculiar and documented detail stubbornly remained: the account of his own extraordinary physical healing. Years prior, he had been the victim of a severe accident, an event that left him with injuries so grievous that they required numerous complex surgical interventions. The medical prognosis was grim. Complete recovery was considered an impossibility, but against all expectations, he did recover. Not partially, but totally. This outcome baffled the medical professionals who had treated him. The official records, his medical file, still exist, chronicling the accident's severity and the subsequent operations. These documents stand as a testament to a recovery that seemed to defy scientific explanation. Everything else, the celestial visitors, the cosmic warnings, the grand prophecies, all stemmed from his word alone. But the healing was different. It was a tangible mystery. Could this one inexplicable event lend credence to his far grander, unverified claims? To explore this possibility, it becomes necessary to look beyond this single, tragic story and examine other parallel cases. One such case, emerging from a different corner of the world, offers a compelling echo. We must travel to the rugged highlands of Peru, to the year 1982. In the remote Uncas region, a powerful rumor began to circulate, spreading like wildfire from one mountain village to the next. The whisper spoke of a humble man, Donato Cervantes, who possessed a miraculous gift. It was said he could cure the sick with the help of extraterrestrials, channeling their healing power through nothing more than the simple imposition of his hands. This man was not just a healer. Local accounts claimed he possessed other astonishing abilities, that he could perform feats that defied all rational explanation. Naturally, this reputation began to draw people from far and wide. The desperate and the curious formed long lines, undertaking arduous journeys to his small village in the hope that he could help them. He became a figure of immense fame in his time, a living legend in the Andes. But the most incredible part of his story was his own origin narrative. Donato Cervantes claimed he had not always possessed these gifts. His tale was a wild one, asserting that he himself had been grievously ill or injured and was subsequently cured by non-human entities. It was through this profound, otherworldly intervention, he claimed, that he had been imbued with these extraordinary abilities, forever becoming a conduit for their power. In the annals of strange encounters, the terminology used by the witness is often as revealing as the event itself. This individual issued the common label of extraterrestrials, a term saturated with cultural baggage. Instead, he chose his own lexicon, initially referring to the entities as forasteros del espacio, space outsiders. The name suggests beings, not just from another world, but strangers in a profound sense, visitors who were fundamentally alien to our reality. Later, this term would evolve, becoming the more poetic and evocative habitantes de la galaxia celeste, or inhabitants of the celestial galaxy, a title that hints at a grander, more majestic origin. But this refined vocabulary was forged in the crucible of harrowing experience. For the man in question was no stranger to the inexplicable. His history with the phenomenon was not a singular event, but a disturbing progression. The first significant chapter unfolded in the year 1974. During this initial incident, he reported observing a craft of unknown origin, an event shrouded in a fog of missing time and fractured memories. The details remained elusive, like the remnants of a vivid but fading dream. What lingered was the deep, unsettling certainty that he had been taken, that he had undergone some form of abduction, procedure which concluded with a memory wipe, a classic hallmark of such reported encounters, leaving him with more questions than answers, and a nascent sense of being watched. 1 year later, however, the ambiguity would be violently stripped away. In the autumn of 1975, specifically, a cool September evening, the phenomenon returned, and this time it would be anything but subtle. The man was navigating a lonely stretch of road in his small work truck, the engine a familiar drone against the quiet of the countryside. Suddenly, the darkness was shattered. A blindingly intense light erupted from a nearby mountain, a silent, incandescent sphere that seemed to burn a hole in the night sky. The light descended, and as it did, the truck's engine sputtered and died. The headlights flickered and extinguished, plunging him into an abrupt, deafening silence. Every electrical system was dead. The vehicle, his only link to civilization, was now a useless metal shell, completely immobilized. He turned the key in the ignition, but there was nothing. A profound sense of dread began to creep in. Prying the heavy door open, he stepped out into the chilling air, and it was then that he felt a tan invisible, inexorable force taking hold of him. It was a physical pull, a tangible energy emanating from the brilliant orb above, drawing him out of the cabin against his will. He looked down in a panic, and the true horror of his situation became clear. His feet were no longer touching the ground. He was not just being pulled, he was being lifted ascending into the night sky as if he were weightless. The ground, the truck, the familiar road, all shrank below him, the world transforming into a terrifying, unfamiliar map. As he rose higher and higher, panic gave way to sheer terror. And then, as abruptly as it had begun, the light vanished. The force that held him evaporated. In an instant he was plunged into total darkness and freefall. Gravity reasserted its brutal claim, and he plummeted 20 meters through the empty air, his trajectory ending on a bed of unforgiving rocks below. The impact was catastrophic. Consciousness fled in a wave of blinding pain. He was discovered later by passers-by, a broken figure sprawled amidst the crags, rushed to the nearest hospital. His condition was dire. The medical assessment was a grim litany of trauma, widespread contusions, severe internal and external injuries, significant cranial damage, and collapsed lungs. He was, for all intents and purposes, a man at the edge of death. The doctors, seeing the extent of the damage, deemed his case hopeless. Rather than waste precious resources, they moved him to a gurney in a quiet corner of the ward, leaving him there to die. But as he hovered in the twilight between life and death during the darkest hours of that morning, he was not alone. The figures appeared at his bedside, the very same space outsiders from his past. In a silent, telepathic exchange, they conveyed a message of apology. They explained that their intention had not been to cause him such grievous harm. The fall was a terrible accident. Their true purpose, they communicated, was to impart a message of great importance. To rectify their mistake, they would heal him. They began to move their hands over his shattered body, performing strange, intricate decades. A palpable warmth and inexplicable energy flowed into him. By the time the morning sun streamed through the hospital windows, a miracle had occurred. The man was not only conscious but standing, walking as if untouched by the previous night's trauma. The medical staff were their scientific understanding completely unable to reconcile the mangled patient from the night before with the perfectly healthy man who now stood before them. Without a word, he simply walked out of the hospital and disappeared. This incredible event, however, was layered upon the memory of the previous year's ridicule. When he had first tried to share his 1974 experience, he was met with universal disbelief and mockery. Friends and neighbors dismissed his story as a drunken fantasy or a sign of encroaching madness. Now, armed with a truth even more fantastic and terrifying, he was left utterly alone with his impossible knowledge. And so it was that when Donato experienced his second profound encounter in 1975, a deep-seated caution took hold. This time, he would tell no one. He would seal the incredible events within himself and simply attempt to carry on with the familiar rhythms of his existence. To understand his silence, one must understand the man himself. Donato was a figure of profound simplicity, a man whose life was etched by the raw earth and the demands of manual labor. At this juncture, being approximately 31 years of age, he was a man entirely unshaped by formal institutions of learning. He had never attended school, his literacy extending only to the most basic ability to decipher a few words and slowly form the letters of his own name. His education was the world itself, a harsh but effective teacher. His life was a testament to resilience and adaptability, a continuous cycle of whatever work could be found. He had been a construction worker feeling the grit of cement under his fingernails, a farmhand knowing the sun's unforgiving heat on his back, a mechanic, his hands perpetually stained with grease, a driver navigating the dusty roads of rural Peru. He did whatever was necessary to survive. Consequently, the idea of publicly proclaiming a story involving extraterrestrials, of inviting the inevitable scorn and disbelief, began to fill him with a palpable anxiety. He feared being branded a madman or a liar, a social ostracization he could not afford. The safest course of action was silence. But soon after, he could no longer deny that something fundamental within him had been irrevocably altered. This realization crystallized following the incident where, according to his detailed testimony, he was transported by these same silent visitors, ese forasteros del espacio, or strangers from space, guided him not towards the stars, but down into the abyssal depths of the Pacific Ocean. They took him to what he could only describe as an immense, submerged city, a breathtaking metropolis, resting on the seabed some 20-odd kilometers from the Peruvian coast. When he was returned to the surface world, he came back with more than just memories. He sensed new latent abilities, subtle but undeniable changes to his own physical and perceptual makeup. Yet this knowledge brought with it a profound fear, a weight of responsibility for extras he did not understand. He held on to his secrets, aware that another, even more dramatic event was yet to unfold. Some time later, fate intervened with brutal force. Donato was involved in yet another accident, a recurring theme that seems to follow those who have had such encounters. He was merely a passenger in a vehicle when another car slammed into them with devastating impact. The collision sent him lurching forward, his body a projectile inside the metal cage, his right hand smashed through the windshield, the shattering glass acting like a guillotine. The injury was catastrophic. It was not a clean cut, but a violent tear-in that severed tendons, muscles, arteries, and skin, leaving the hand almost completely detached, hanging by a mere shred of flesh and tissue. Rushed to the nearest hospital, the medical prognosis was grim and immediate. The attending physicians, seeing the mangled limb, saw only one viable option. They explained in stark terms that any attempt to save the hand would be futile. The damage was too extensive, the risk of infection too high. Inevitably, they warned, gangrene would set in, a creeping death that would ascend his arm, ultimately requiring a far more drastic amputation at the shoulder. Their advice was pragmatic and urgent. Cut the hand off now to save the arm later. But Donato, lying there in the sterile, dispassionate environment of the hospital, refused. He listened to their logic and then, with a quiet but unshakable resolve, he responded, "You will cut nothing from me." He then wrapped the horrifically injured hand in a simple bandage, discharged himself against all medical advice, and walked out. What followed defies conventional explanation. Against all odds, the hand healed. Not only did it heal, but it was restored to a state of perfect functionality. The mobility returned completely. The intricate network of nerves and muscles refused, leaving behind an appendage that appeared as if it had never suffered any trauma at all. But this was not merely a restoration. It was an upgrade. He began to notice phenomena that were utterly bizarre. One day, he picked up a dense river stone, and with a casual clench of his fist, felt it crumble into dust. He discovered he could take a solid iron bar, a material meant to resist human strength, and bend it into a loop with astonishing ease. He could lift staggering weights with that one hand, a feat that felt less like his own strength and more like he was channeling some external, limitless power. The hand had become an instrument of superhuman capabilities. More unsettling, however, was the subsequent revelation that this power was not limited to inanimate objects. He discovered, perhaps by accident, that he could also heal. By laying his hand on the afflicted, he could channel that same inexplicable energy to mend the ailments of others. This was the turning point. Compelled by this new purpose, he began to cautiously share his story, recounting the encounters and the accident, using his own incredible healing as proof. He even revealed that the visitors had left him with a physical artifact, a small, perfectly formed pyramid carved from an unknown black stone. It came with a strange and absolute directive: eat must never, under any circumstances, come into contact with water or even high levels of humidity, a mysterious condition for an object supposedly connected to an underwater city. The object of veneration was housed with the utmost care, sealed within a small, immaculately clear crystal box. It was presented not as a distant relic, but as an accessible source of wonder. The glass casing, smooth and cool to the touch, created a fragile barrier between the known world and the impossible artifact it contained. People would approach, some with reverence, others with a skeptical curiosity, their faces reflected in its pristine surfaces as they leaned in close, their warm breath momentarily misting the glass. For a time, the narrative held a powerful allure, a promise of something beyond the ordinary. The man at the center of it all, Donato Cervantes, continued to be a vessel for extraordinary claims. He spoke not of his own innate abilities, but of a profound connection to entities he called messengers from space. These beings, he explained, hailed from a distant, ethereal realm he named the Celestial Galaxy, and it was they who served as the source of his knowledge and power. According to Cervantes, they had selected him, imparting messages of cosmic importance and, most astoundingly, bestowing upon him a unique gift for healing. This was not a technique learned from earthly masters or ancient texts. It was, he insisted, a methodology utterly alien to this planet, a form of curative energy that could mend the body with nothing more than the touch of his hands. Yet, as mysteriously as the gift was given, it was ultimately rescinded. Cervantes explained its withdrawal not as a failure, but as a protective measure enacted by his otherworldly benefactors. As whispers of his miraculous cures spread, they inevitably reached the ears of established institutions. The medical community grew concerned, and governmental authorities began to take notice. Scrutiny intensified, morphing into suspicion and then outright hostility. He faced mounting pressure, the looming threat of official investigation, public condemnation, and even imprisonment for practicing medicine without a license. Then, one day, the ability simply vanished. The flow of energy ceased. His hands became ordinary flesh once more. The visitors, he claimed, had concluded that humanity was not yet ready for such a powerful physical demonstration. Society's response fear and aggression had proven their point. However, they determined that humanity was, perhaps, ready for the message itself. And so, the people continued to come, seeking not physical cures, but spiritual or philosophical guidance. At the heart of this story was the curious stone, which, according to the narrative, eventually disintegrated, dissolving into nothingness after a period of time. Cervantes' explanation for its origin was as cosmic as his healing powers. He claimed it was an artifact constructed from materials harvested on the gas giant Jupiter, a planet that served as a remote outpost or celestial meeting point for these visitors. They would allegedly convene there on a precise cycle, every 30 to 32 years, and from this Jovian conclave, the stone had been brought to Earth. The very notion strains credulity, a fantastic tale woven from the fabric of science fiction. Yet, there were those who pointed to medical records and personal testimonies that seemed to corroborate his incredible healing claims. Beyond the power to heal, the visitors supposedly shared other, more disquieting information with him. One revelation was particularly seismic, a direct challenge to a cornerstone of 20th century achievement, the assertion that humankind never actually reached the moon. The messengers allegedly informed that the solar system, and space in general, was far from empty. It was, in their telling, a monitored and regulated territory, and humanity's Apollo missions, for all their terrestrial fanfare, had never been permitted to land on the lunar surface. They also tasked him with disseminating a message of peace and a warning against self-destruction, offering the promise of shared technologies if humanity could prove itself worthy. It was a familiar refrain in the lore of extraterrestrial contact, a consistent theme of cosmic guidance. Donato Cervantes passed away in 2013, leaving behind a legacy preserved not in books he authored, but in the scattered ephemera of media coverage, faded newspaper articles, and magazine features from his time in the public eye. In the modern era, his story persists primarily online, where at least 2 websites claim to be his official digital successors, dedicated to preserving his teachings. The tale exists in a state of ambiguity. One can choose to believe or to dismiss it entirely, but the accounts suggest that for a time, in a small corner of the world, something truly unusual transpired. From this world of esoteric claims, our focus now shifts northward, crossing borders and decades. We travel to the United States, to a specific moment frozen in time, the 3rd of September, 1965. The setting is a lonely stretch of asphalt cutting through the vast, flat expanse of rural Texas. The air is thick with the late summer heat, the sky a bleached-out blue. We are on State Highway 36, a ribbon of road connecting the small communities of West Columbia and Damon. On this isolated highway, a police patrol car moves through the shimmering heat haze. Inside, 2 sheriff's deputies, their uniforms crisp, are winding down their shift. The rhythmic hum of the engine, a familiar drone against the quiet landscape. The night air in rural Texas is often thick with an ancient stillness, a profound quiet broken only by the hum of an engine or the distant call of a nocturnal creature. On this particular evening, under a sky awash with stars, Tula men were nearing the end of their shift. One of them, a man named McCoy, was not just any officer. He was a chief deputy, a veteran lawman vested with immense responsibility, overseeing the operations and the very lives of more than 40 deputies under his command. His experience had taught him to read the subtleties of the night, to recognize the ordinary, and to be wary of the unusual. Beside him, at the wheel of the patrol car, was Officer Robert Good, a diligent and steady policeman, navigating the familiar dark roads. It was approximately 11 o'clock at night, the final leg of a long patrol, and a sense of routine had settled over the interior of the vehicle. As they drove their conversation casual, their minds winding down, a strange anomaly pierced the darkness on the horizon. It was a light, but unlike any beacon or celestial body they had ever witnessed. It hovered silently, emitting a deep, ethereal purple glow, a mesmerizing violet that seemed to absorb the surrounding blackness. It was utterly stationary, a silent, luminous question mark against the vast canvas of the cosmos. Intrigued, Officer Good eased his foot off the accelerator, the patrol car slowing its pace as both men leaned forward, their eyes fixed on the distant spectacle. They edged the car toward the shoulder of the road, the gravel crunching under the tires. It was in that moment of focused observation that the event escalated. From the primary purple light, a second, smaller point of light detached itself with an impossible, fluid grace. This new light was a brilliant, intense blue, a sharp sapphire that pulsed with its own energy. The two lights then began a slow, deliberate dance, a silent, coordinated movement that defied any logical explanation. Chief McCoy, his instincts honed by years of service, broke the silence. He turned to his partner, his voice calm but firm, masking a rising sense of urgency. He instructed Officer Good to turn the vehicle around, to proceed toward the lights. This was no longer a curiosity. It was an unknown situation that demanded investigation. Officer Good complied without hesitation, executing a three-point turn on the narrow road. As they accelerated toward the Enigma, he remembered a piece of equipment stowed in the car, a pair of binoculars. While keeping one hand on the wheel and his eyes on the road, he fumbled for the field glasses, attempting to bring the distant lights into focus. The bouncing of the car and the split focus of the task made it difficult, offering only fleeting, shaky glimpses of the two glowing forms. They pressed on, closing the distance, the landscape around them stark and empty. Suddenly, the object, or objects, executed a maneuver of breathtaking speed and precision. In the blink of an eye, the purple light traversed the intervening space, repositioning itself with silent, instantaneous velocity. It now hovered a mere 50 meters from their patrol car. The sheer proximity was imposing, and for the first time, they could discern its true nature. What they saw was not merely a light, but a solid, physical craft. It was a massive, distinctly triangular object, its form outlined against the moonlit sky. The entire structure radiated that same otherworldly violet glow, a soft, pulsating luminescence that seemed to emanate from the very material of its hull. The smaller blue light had moved in perfect concert, now positioned off to one side, like a scout or an escort. The brilliance of the moon was a critical factor in this moment. The moonlight was strong enough that the colossal triangular form, hovering silently above the Texas Scrublin, cast a definitive shadow upon the ground below. This was the irrefutable proof their minds desperately sought. This was a solid, three-dimensional object. It was real. And it was utterly alien. The realization shattered their professional composure. The cold, analytical mind of the lawman was overwhelmed by a primal, instinctual fear. Panics set in. Officer Good slammed his foot on the accelerator, the engine roaring in protest as the tires bit into the dirt, propelling them away from the silent, hovering craft. They were fleeing, driving as fast as the vehicle could manage. Their destination, the small town of Damon. As they sped away, their eyes were glued to the mirrors. McCoy watched through the rear window while Good glanced at his side view mirror. They witnessed the blue light smoothly, silently merge back with a larger triangular object. The unified craft then hovered for a moment longer before ascending vertically into the night sky. Vanishing from sight with a speed that seemed to defy the laws of physics, reaching the relative safety of Damon, they pulled over, the flashing lights of their own vehicle seeming mundane and insignificant compared to what they had just witnessed. They sat in the silence for a moment, the adrenaline slowly receding, leaving a tremor in its wake. They began to speak, comparing their observations, meticulously recounting every detail. "What did you see?" "What did I see?" The descriptions matched perfectly. The purple triangle, the blue sphere, the impossible speed, the profound silence. The shared experience validated the unbelievable reality. Then, a sentiment unique to those who run toward danger rather than away from it began to surface through the fear. Doubt, followed by a surge of professional duty. What was it? Had they abandoned a situation they should have investigated further? The question hung in the air between them, and an unspoken agreement was reached. They had to go back. With renewed determination, they turned the patrol car around and headed back toward the location of the encounter. They cautiously navigated down a narrow side road, a dusty track that led deeper into the isolated countryside, their eyes scanning the dark horizon. And then it happened again. As if waiting for them, the phenomenon reappeared. It was directly in front of them, seemingly descending to meet them. The smaller, brilliant blue sphere led the way, followed by the immense, silently glowing purple triangle. It was not a random sighting. It felt like a deliberate, intelligent, and chillingly direct confrontation. The cool September air, a precursor to the coming autumn, did little to soothe the tension inside the patrol car. For Officer Robert Woodgood, the night had been a long stretch of routine punctuated by silence. His hand rested casually on the frame of the open window, a familiar posture on an otherwise unremarkable shift. Suddenly, an anomaly, an intense, searing heat began to radiate through his arm, a sensation so alien and powerful it felt as though he had plunged his limb into a furnace. It was a dry, penetrating heat that defied the crisp night air, climbing from his hand, through his wrist, and up his forearm. He looked down, expecting to see flames, but his long-sleeved shirt was perfectly intact. There was no visible source, no logical explanation, just a wave of invisible, thermal energy engulfing him. The silent calm of the patrol car was shattered. A shared, primal fear ignited between the two officers. Without a word, the engine roared to life, tires screeching on the asphalt as they accelerated away, leaving the inexplicable phenomenon behind them. Their destination was not the precinct, but the home of a local judge, a pillar of reason and authority in a world that had suddenly ceased to make sense. They needed a witness, a credible third party to anchor their sanity, to hear their breathless, frantic story before it dissolved into the realm of delusion. The judge, roused from his sleep, listened with a practiced stoicism before offering the only logical advice he could muster. They needed to make an official report, and the only authority equipped to handle such a bizarre aerial encounter was the United States Air Force. Following this counsel, they drove to the nearby base. The imposing architecture of the military installation, a stark contrast to the unearthly event they had just witnessed. Inside, they were promptly separated, a standard procedure designed to prevent collusion and ensure the integrity of their individual testimonies. Each man was escorted to a Spartan, windowless room, and subjected to a methodical, dispassionate debriefing. They recounted the strange lights, the silent craft, and the inexplicable wave of heat, their words echoing in the clinical silence, scrutinized by unseen analysts. When the lengthy process finally concluded, the first light of dawn was already streaking the eastern sky. It was now 4, perhaps 5 in the morning, and the world was beginning to stir. Exhausted and emotionally frayed, the officers sought refuge in the mundane familiarity of an all-night diner. Over cups of steaming black coffee, the weight of their experience settled upon them. They spoke in hushed tones, the conversation circling back to the inevitable consequences of their official report. The fear of ridicule, of being labeled unstable, of their careers being irrevocably damaged, hung heavy in the air. McCoy, attempting to inject a moment of levity into the tense atmosphere, turned to his partner. He remarked that for all the night's terror and strangeness, there was at least one silver lining. The entire ordeal had been so consuming that Good had likely forgotten all about the excruciating pain in his finger. Good managed a weak smile, acknowledging the truth in his partner's observation. And then the memory came rushing back. The incident had occurred just that morning, a chaotic scene of domestic surprise. His young son had appeared, triumphantly dragging a small, yet formidable, alligator from a nearby waterway. Instinct taking over, Good had rushed to intervene, to separate his child from the wild creature and return it to its habitat. As he grabbed the reptile by its tail, it whipped around with astonishing speed, its jaws snapping shut on his finger. The pain was immediate, white-hot, and blinding. The alligator's teeth had torn through flesh and tendon, nearly severing the digit completely. It was a gruesome, debilitating injury. His day had then devolved into a frustrating and fruitless search for medical attention. The town doctor, Eternidad, was attending a local sporting event. Unable to properly grip the steering wheel or operate his vehicle, Good had reported to the precinct, his hand wrapped in a makeshift, blood-soaked bandage. His superiors, seeing the severity of the wound, assigned McCoy to drive with him. In a strange twist of fate, their patrol had taken them past the very event the doctor was attending, but by the time they arrived, he had already left. The throbbing, relentless pain had been his constant companion throughout the entire shift. Now, sitting in the diner, McCoy's offhand comment brought the injury back into sharp focus. "You know, that's true," Good mused, a look of curiosity replacing the weariness on his face. "I haven't even thought to check on it." Slowly, almost hesitantly, he began to unwrap the stained bandage. He expected to see the mangled, bloody mess he had concealed hours earlier. But as the final layer of cloth fell away, he stared at his hand in stunned silence. The wound was gone, not healing, not scarred over, but completely and utterly vanished. The skin was smooth and unbroken, the flesh perfectly whole. He turned his hand over and over under the diner's fluorescent lights, searching for any trace of the brutal injury. There was nothing. The finger that had been nearly bitten off just hours before was now impossibly pristine. As the first rays of morning light sliced through the blinds, the night's terrifying events felt like a fever dream. But the throbbing in Officer Lonnie Zamora's hand was a stark reminder of its reality. He braced himself, cautiously unwrapping the makeshift bandage, expecting to see the mangled, bloodied flesh of his nearly severed finger. The previous night, the pain had been excruciating, a white-hot agony that had seared itself into his memory. Yet what he saw in the clear light of day defied all logic and medical science. The wound was gone, not merely healed, but vanished. Where there should have been torn ligaments, shattered bone, and a deep, gaping laceration, there was only smooth, uninterrupted skin. A faint, pinkish line, thinner than a hair, was the only ghost of the injury. A mark so subtle it was practically imperceptible. Within a matter of hours, a wound that should have required extensive surgery and months of recovery had been completely and perfectly reconstructed. It was a biological impossibility, the first piece of irrefutable, physical evidence that what had transpired in the desert was beyond human comprehension. The story, however, was far from over. A few days later, while the incident was still a tightly held secret, known only to a handful of officials, Officer Good received a call at the precinct. He was summoned. Two individuals, identifying themselves as reporters, were asking for him specifically. They were waiting at a small, unassuming coffee shop just a block away. A sense of unease settled over the officer. How could any reporter possibly know about the incident? The official report was under lock and key, a matter of Air Force jurisdiction. Arriving at the cafe, he spotted them immediately. They were seated in a corner booth, two conspicuously short men, looking utterly out of place in their identical, crisp black suits and peculiar, old-fashioned hats. Their skin was an unnaturally pale white, a stark contrast to their dark attire. They sat perfectly still, their posture rigid. As Good approached, they introduced themselves with bland, generic names he would later struggle to recall. They claimed to be from a newspaper he had never heard of. Good, a man trained in observation and interrogation, felt his professional instincts flare. These were not reporters. He sat down, offering a cautious, "How can I help you?" He expected a barrage of questions, the typical journalistic probing. Instead, what came next was not a question, but a statement, delivered in a flat, monotone voice devoid of any emotion. One of the men looked directly at him and said, "If you and your partner had not departed with such velocity that night, you would have been permitted to board the craft. You would have been shown things, concepts not yet revealed to any human being." The words hung in the air, thick with unspoken meaning. The man continued, his voice never wavering. "Of course, you would have been returned completely unharmed, and you would have been forbidden from ever speaking of what you saw. But the knowledge you would have gained would have been astonishing." Officer Good was stunned into silence. A cold dread washed over him. His mind reeled, not just from the content of their message, but from the terrifying implication of its delivery. How did they know? How could they possibly know the details of an encounter reported only to the United States Air Force? It was a catastrophic breach of security, suggesting an intelligence network beyond any terrestrial agency. The two strange men, their message delivered, simply stood up in unison. Without another word, they turned and walked out of the cafe, their small, black-clad figures disappearing into the midday crowd as if they were never there. Shaken Good immediately contacted his superior, Chief McCoy. He relayed the bizarre and chilling encounter. McCoy, ever the pragmatist, listened intently before offering a sobering conclusion. It was a blessing they had fled the scene. Had they boarded that ship, they might have returned with their memories wiped clean, or worse, been driven to speak of it, only to be dismissed as lunatics. Their careers and reputations destroyed. The incident was officially logged. The inexplicable healing of the officer's hand noted as a mysterious cure. The credibility of the two officers was unimpeachable. They were seasoned lawmen with exemplary records. This detail elevated the case far above a simple sighting of strange lights. It became a cornerstone file within the government's official investigation into the phenomenon. Project Blue Book. There, it was given the one classification that sent a chill down the spine of even the most hardened investigators. Unidentified, this was not a case of mistaken identity or atmospheric tricks. It was a verified encounter, with two highly reliable witnesses and unexplainable physical evidence, an event that the full investigative power of the U.S. government could not debunk. This chillingly authenticated case, however, is but one piece of a much larger, global puzzle. As American authorities grappled with the implications of the Socorro landing, similar strange narratives were unfolding across the world, each adding its own unique and baffling chapter to the enigma. One of the most remarkable of these stories would emerge from the vibrant, bustling heart of Mexico, and it would involve a public figure known to millions. The celebrated television host, Talina Fernandez. In the vast and ever-shifting pantheon of Mexican media personalities, certain figures achieve a status that transcends mere celebrity, becoming enduring cultural touchstones. Talina Fernandez, who passed away some time ago, was unequivocally one such individual. For decades, she was a constant, reassuring presence, a face and a voice that graced countless television programs. From hard-hitting news broadcasts to glittering variety shows, she was affectionately known as La Señora del Buen Decir, the Lady of Good. Spaquina title that perfectly encapsulated her essence. She projected an aura of effortless, her voice a masterfully controlled instrument capable of conveying both authority and warmth. Her on-screen presence was commanding yet approachable, and she possessed a degree of credibility that audiences implicitly trusted. In an era when television networks were monolithic institutions, Talina Fernandez was one of their most distinguished ambassadors, a woman who truly gave the medium its face. Yet, behind this polished public persona lay a repository of extraordinary experiences, including one particularly bizarre episode she recounted years later. The story, a strange confluence of international paranormal celebrity and local folklore, unfolds in the year 1977. At this point in her career, a young Talina was a dynamic and indispensable talent at her television station. Her versatility was her greatest asset. She was the go-to person for virtually any task, from conducting a high-profile interview to hosting a major broadcast. On this specific occasion, her assignment was one of translation. The guest of honor was a global phenomenon, a man whose name was synonymous with the inexplicable. Uri Geller. Geller had arrived in Mexico as part of his world tour, a figure shrouded in mystique and controversy. He was a sensation, captivating audiences by seemingly bending spoons and keys with the power of his mind. His visit was already generating significant buzz, amplified by swirling rumors of a contentious entanglement with the wife of Mexico's president, a scandal that added a layer of political intrigue to his paranormal prowess. However, despite his international fame, Geller did not speak a word of Spanish. This necessitated his appearance on a popular television program to be a carefully orchestrated affair. He was seated in the studio, under the hot glare of the broadcast lights, with Talina Fernandez and a colleague positioned as his linguistic conduits to the Mexican public. The mechanics of the live translation were a delicate dance. A host or an audience member would pose a question in Spanish. Talina would then lean in, crisply translating the query into English for Geller. After he delivered his response, her friend would translate it back into Spanish for the viewers at home. They were a two-person team tasked with bridging the language barrier for this enigmatic personality. The program began as expected. Geller, with his characteristic intensity, launched into his well-honed performance. He spoke of unseen energies and the untapped potential of the human mind. He held up a simple spoon, and before the unblinking eye of the camera, appeared to make its solid metal neck bend and curl as if it were soft wax. The studio's telephone switchboard began to light up, a testament to the public's fascination. Call after call came in, viewers eager to ask questions, to challenge him, to seek answers. The set was abuzz with a palpable energy. Then, amidst the flurry of typical inquiries, one particular call managed to cut through the noise. The caller's tone was different, more pointed. They suggested that if Mr. Geller truly possessed such an extraordinary gift, such a strange and powerful magnetism, he was squandering it. Instead of performing what amounted to parlor tricks by bending cutlery, the caller insisted he should be using his power for a higher purpose, to heal the sick. It was at this moment that the conversation took a sharp, unexpected turn into the realm of local legend. As a justification for this demand, the caller added a startlingly specific and cryptic reference, stating that Geller should heal people just like the extraterrestrials of Ajusco do, who heal with their hands. Ajusco? The mountainous region, at the southern edge of Mexico City, was known for its forests, but certainly not for any widely reported alien healers. The comment was bizarre. A non sequitur dropped into the middle of a national broadcast. Talina, the consummate professional, took the call. She dutifully relayed the strange message to Auriglar, translating the caller's plea and the peculiar mention of alien healers. Geller, likely accustomed to all manner of strange suggestions, offered a brief, perhaps nonsensical, response before the show moved on. Talina, focused on her task, continued with the broadcast, navigating the flow of conversation as the phones continued to ring with frantic energy. The incident seemed like a momentary blip, a weird anecdote in an already unusual evening. The true impact of that single, fleeting comment would not be understood until the following morning. When Talina Fernandez arrived at the television station for her next workday, she walked into a scene of utter chaos. The reception area was a storm of activity. The switchboard operators were completely overwhelmed, their consoles blinking with an endless cascade of incoming calls. The phones, which had been ringing incessantly since the broadcast ended, had not stopped. But the callers were not asking about Uri Geller, the international psychic. They weren't debating his spoon-bending abilities or the presidential scandal. Overwhelmingly, the public was consumed by a single question, sparked by that one peculiar call. They all wanted to know how they could find the extraterrestrials in Ajusco that could cure the sick. A strange, modern myth had been accidentally born on live television, launched into the collective consciousness by an offhand remark, and it was Talina Fernandez who had stood at the epicenter of its creation. The narrative, by its very nature, borders on the unbelievable. It sounds like a fabrication, a bizarre flight of fancy, yet it represents a phenomenon that was tangibly unfolding. In the bustling metropolis, a strange fervor had taken hold. Phone lines at media outlets and private homes alike were inundated with hundreds upon hundreds of calls from ordinary people, each asking the same extraordinary question: how could they find the extraterrestrials who possessed the power to heal? This wave of public intrigue and desperate hope had swept through the city. But for one woman, Talina, the connection was deeply personal. In the whirlwind of her own initial encounter, a critical detail had been lost. She hadn't thought to ask for a phone number, hadn't saved the small, unassuming slip of paper that held the key. Now, a profound sense of regret washed over her, a feeling of acute embarrassment for letting such a monumental opportunity slip through her fingers. As the days ticked by, the initial excitement curdled into the quiet resignation of a chance lost forever. Then, just as the episode was beginning to fade into memory, the telephone rang. It was a close friend, her voice laced with a mixture of confusion and disbelief. She had a strange story to tell, an incident so peculiar it defied logical explanation. She recounted her journey from the nearby city of Toluca, a routine drive that had been abruptly interrupted by the hiss of a punctured tire. Stranded on the shoulder of a busy highway, she had decided to wait for assistance at a small, roadside cafe. While nursing a cup of coffee, a man had materialized at her table. He was a striking figure, with a shock of red hair, and dressed entirely in a matching crimson hue. He introduced himself simply as Jorge. Without any preamble, he had looked directly at her and asked, "You are Talina's friend, are you not?" The question was so direct, so specific, it left her momentarily speechless. Before she could fully process the encounter, he pressed a piece of paper into her hand, his instructions clear and concise. "Tell her to contact me. I am the one who can take her to the extraterrestrials of a The friend was utterly baffled. The encounter was too improbable, too fortuitous, to be a mere coincidence. She had no prior knowledge of Talina's quest, and had never heard of any celestial visitors in the Ajuska Mountains. She had even laughed nervously, questioning the man about these supposed beings. Taking the small note, more out of politeness than belief, she passed the contact information to Talina. With a trembling hand and a heart pounding with renewed hope, Talina dialed the number for the man known only as El Rojo, the Red One. When Jorge answered, his voice was calm, entirely matter-of-fact. He confirmed everything. "Yes," he said, "I can take you." Seeking a buffer of safety and witnesses for this incredible journey, Talina cautiously asked if her husband could accompany her. Jorge agreed without hesitation. She then asked if a friend could also join the party. Again, the answer was an immediate yes. A date was set for the following Thursday. The intervening days were fraught with a nervous anticipation. Then, on the Tuesday, just 2 days before the scheduled meeting, disaster struck. Rushing through her typically hectic day, balancing on a pair of perilously high heels, Talina's foot caught, and she fell. The impact was violent and immediate. Her knee took the brunt of the fall. The injury far more than a simple scrape. The skin was torn away, a gruesome wound that made it excruciatingly painful to even bend her leg. Walking became a near impossibility. The pain was a blinding, relentless force, and she found herself caught in a terrible dilemma. Should she cancel the trip of a lifetime? As she agonized over the decision, the phone rang. It was Jorge, confirming that he was on his way to pick them up. The moment of truth had arrived. When they looked outside, an unusual vehicle was parked at the curb. It was a large, windowless barn, its solid metal sides, giving it an imposing, almost menacing appearance. The only glass was at the very front, for the driver and a single passenger. It was a vehicle designed for utility and concealment, not for sightseeing. Jorge directed them to the rear cargo area, a clear indication that their destination was to remain a secret, their route obscured from view. As they set off, Talina was consumed by the throbbing agony in her leg. Every bump and turn of the unseen road sent a fresh wave of searing pain through her injured knee. After a long, disorienting drive, the van finally came to a halt. The doors opened, and they stepped out into the crisp mountain air. From their high vantage point, they could see the vast, sprawling expanse of Mexico City laid out below them like a blanket of distant lights. It was then that Jorge issued his first directive. "From here," he stated calmly, "we must walk." Talina stared at him in disbelief. "How can I possibly walk?" she protested, gesturing to her mangled knee. "I can barely stand." Jorge's expression remained serene, his confidence unwavering. "Do not worry," he replied. "Just start walking. When you arrive, you will see that you are perfectly fine. The journey proceeds, winding deeper into the formidable and often enigmatic mountain range of the Agustín, a vast expanse of volcanic rock and dense pine forest that serves as the southern guardian of Mexico City. This is a place of stark contrasts, where the urban sprawl abruptly gives way to a rugged, untamed wilderness. As their vehicle navigates the precarious roads, the sounds of the city fade, replaced by the whisper of the wind through the trees. They are in pursuit of something beyond conventional understanding, a possibility whispered about in hushed tones. Eventually, they arrive at their destination, a simple, almost primitive shack, a testament to a life lived far from modern comforts. The structure is humble, pieced together from wood and corrugated metal. In a dusty, sun-drenched patio outside, a group of people, their faces weathered by the elements, are silently engrossed in their work, their hands moving with practiced ease as they weave intricate patterns into some unknown fabric. Their presence is quiet, their poverty palpable, yet there is a profound sense of peace in their focused activity. A man approaches, his gaze direct, and indicates that this is merely a waypoint. The true destination, he implies, lies further within. He leads the way, and she follows, her apprehension growing with every step. He guides her toward a small, unassuming structure and into a room that immediately feels different. It is a space entirely devoid of windows, a sealed chamber cut off from the outside world. A single, bare light source casts a dim, sterile glow, illuminating the space, but failing to dispel the oppressive shadows that cling to the corners. The air is still and heavy. As her eyes adjust, she takes in the scene. Arranged within the room are approximately 20 individuals, all of them men, and all of them dressed in stark, uniform black. They are not otherworldly creatures or spectral apparitions. They appear entirely human, yet their collective presence is intensely unnerving. They are simply there, silent and watchful, their purpose a complete mystery. A wave of confusion and fear washes over her. What is this place? Who are these men? The man who led her here offers a simple, cryptic explanation. They will heal you now. The words hang in the air, doing little to calm her escalating panic. Her mind races, conjuring images of hypnosis, of losing control, of being subjected to some strange, esoteric experiment. Though she is not alone, her husband is nearby. His presence feels like a small comfort against the overwhelming strangeness of the situation. Her nerves frayed, she instinctively reaches for a familiar habit, a small ritual of control. Her hands tremble slightly as she pulls a cigarette from its pack, lights it, and inhales deeply. The plume of smoke momentarily veils the silent figures before her. Through the haze, she washes, her senses on high alert. Then, without a word or a signal, the ritual begins. The 20 men, as one, close their eyes. A profound stillness descends upon the room. Their hands begin to move, lifting in unison, performing a series of complex, synchronized gestures that seem to follow an unseen rhythm. The movements are alien, unlike any form of sign language or prayer she has ever witnessed. As they continue their silent, manual incantation, she feels a sudden, piercing sensation. An intense, biting cold begins to creep into her leg, but shockingly, it is localized exclusively to the limb that was injured. It is a cold that feels unnatural, seeping past the skin and deep into the muscle and bone. Her breath catches in her throat. The sight of the men, their eyes shut in deep concentration, combined with this bizarre physical phenomenon, amplifies her fear into near terror. Just as the tension becomes unbearable, the ritual shifts. Abruptly, the men lowered their hands. The silent concentration is shattered as, one by one, they begin to irritate a series of deep, guttural belches that echo disturbingly in the enclosed space. It is a jarring, almost vulgar conclusion to the silent grace of their hand movements, as if they are forcefully expelling something unseen from their bodies. The sheer absurdity of the moment even causes her husband to let out a nervous laugh. But as the men fall silent once more and turn to leave, she becomes aware of a profound change. The throbbing, persistent pain in her leg is gone. Completely. Hesitantly, she stands, testing her weight on it. There is no twinge, no ache, Nothing. With a sense of dawning disbelief, she lifts her pant leg and begins to unwrap the bandage that covers the wound. Underneath, where there should be damaged skin and abrasions, there is nothing. Not a scar, not a scratch, not even the faintest discoloration. Her skin is flawless, the flesh beneath it whole and strong, as if the injury had never occurred. One of the men turns back to her, his expression unreadable. "Do you want to learn?" he asks, his voice even. "Come every day. 7 in the morning. The offer is an invitation into their world. A world where the impossible is made real. But her mind is a whirlwind of conflict. Her career, her friends, the entire structured reality she has built for herself. Can she abandon it all for this? The weight of the decision paralyzes her. Seeing her hesitation, the man simply nods. "If it is not for you, it is not for you," he says, without judgment or persuasion. With that, they turn and depart, melting back into the shadows from which they came. The drive back is a blur. Months pass. The memory of the event remains vivid, a secret she keeps locked away, too personal and too profound to share with a skeptical world. She does not seek fame or fortune from it. Life resumes its normal rhythm, until one day, rushing through the city in high heels, the familiar gives way. She missteps, her foot twists violently, and a sharp, new pain shoots up her leg. The incident forces her into this sterile, rational world of modern medicine. At the orthopedist's office, X-rays are ordered to assess the new damage to her ankle. But, as a matter of routine precaution, the technician is instructed to scan the entire leg, from hip to toe. The clinical quiet of the medical office was broken only by the rustle of paper. After a routine examination, the patient was sent for a standard radiograph. She returned to the consulting room, unaware that the glowing film awaiting the doctor's review held a secret from her own past. The physician entered, his expression a mixture of professional curiosity and slight confusion. He placed the X-ray onto the light box, illuminating the stark, ghostly architecture of bone. He turned to his patient, the renowned news anchor Talina Fernandez, and posed a question that would unravel a profound mystery. The doctor inquired why she hadn't disclosed a previous, significant knee fracture during her medical history intake. He explained its importance, pointing to the undeniable evidence on the film. A look of complete bewilderment crossed her face. A fracture? She insisted it was impossible. She would have remembered such a traumatic injury. But the doctor was adamant. He traced the fine web-like lines on the image, indicating a break that was not only severe, but it also healed with a baffling perfection. The bones seamlessly fused as if sculpted back into place. It was in that moment that a startling realization dawned on her. The leg in the X-ray, the one bearing the phantom scar of a forgotten trauma, was the very same leg that, years earlier, had been the subject of a mysterious and inexplicable healing event. This physical evidence, captured in black and white, served as irrefutable validation of an experience she could barely comprehend herself. Years later, on the set of the television program C'est el Sol, Fernandez, a woman whose career was built on fact and credibility, recounted the entire surreal episode to a captivated national audience. The revelation was staggering. For a figure of her stature, a trusted voice that had delivered hard news for decades, to present such a story was extraordinary. The account of the perfectly healed bone, a fracture she never knew she had, left everyone from the studio audience to viewers at home utterly astonished, creating a legend that blurred the line between the known and the unknowable.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like, subscribe to the channel, leave your comment, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any future episodes. Your support helps us keep creating more content like this. See you in the next episode.